Hello, welcome to this third session of Collage of Mixed Media. Today I'm going to show you how to use Collage to create a textured background to paint over. Okay, today I'm going to show you how to use scrunched up tissue paper glued down, and also mixing ordinary household flour that you find in the kitchen. Any sort of flour will do, mixed with paint to create a textured background. And we're going to be exploring seascapes. Here are some that I have created. These are photographs of some of my bigger paintings using tissue paper and the flour. And once the surface is dry, you can paint over it. But before we can get on with our main painting, I think it's a really good idea to do a little test sheet, and we can I can show you some of the different ways you can use the materials. Okay, so here's a little test sheet I've actually started, and what I'm using, I'm just going to use some ordinary acrylic paints. I'm using white, but you can use any colour, actually, it doesn't matter, and some household flour. And what I'm going to do, I'm just going to mix a little bit of this. You don't need too much, just put a little bit on here. And I'm going to mix a little bit in with the paint. And you want a sort of consistency, just a bit like if you were mixing up plaster to fill up a crack in the wall or something. Just so it's spreadable, really. And hopefully you can see it will give you, not too much over there. Can you see that this has got quite nice and thick now? And that gives you now the flexibility to be able to put it on in different ways. So I'm just going to show you, I'm using a plastic palette knife, any old plastic knife or household knife if you want to wash it off after. It's only so I'm just going to show you, you can apply it quite loosely like this to get a little, just a tiny bit of texture, almost like big brush marks. You can stipple it, sort of lift it up to create little bubbles of texture. You can obviously swirl it around. The other thing that's quite nice is you can sort of put it on and scratch through with a plastic fork. So you just build up a surface of where you want the texture to be, and this will dry. You then need to dry this. I tend to usually just dry it with a hairdryer to speed it all up. So you need to dry this before you obviously paint over the surface. And what we're going to do, I'm going to show you this later, is you paint whatever colour you want to on the top, and then you dry brush, something called dry brushing on the texture, and you're just sort of capturing the raised areas, and that actually really emphasises the texture. So I'm going to show you some sheets I've created earlier with a bit more ideas, but have a little go, have a bit of a sheet, and actually just play with different ways you can apply this to get lots of different textures, suggest different things. All right, so that's the first one. I'm going to show you doing tissue paper next. Okay, so you want a sort of this scrunchy craft tissue paper, not tissue roll. That will be too soft and squidgy and won't really hold the paint. So what we're going to be doing is I'm going to put some glue on here. I'm using PVA. Slap that on to the surface, and the easiest way of doing this is to scrunch it up loosely, I find, and then smooth it out again slightly, just leaving a few creases in place. And what you can do, you can actually mould it slightly on the paper if you want to, and have the creases roughly where you want them to be. Or you can just do it more randomly. The other thing you can do, you can do it a little bit more carefully than that if you want to. I'll just put some glue on the paper first where I want it to be. You can actually almost mould and crease the tissue paper if you would like it to be a bit more precise. So another thing you can do is you could almost do this sort of thing. You can put a little bit on and almost fold it in like this, and actually mould it and make it go in the direction you want it to go a bit more. Okay, so both of these surfaces we now need to dry, and then I can show you colouring them. Here's my sheet with the flour and paint mixed, and it's all nice and dry. Now, so you need to paint it a base colour. So what I'm going to do, I'm going to put on, using some cyan blue here. You will need to scrumble the paint around a little bit into the nooks and crannies, because obviously it's very textured. The idea when this first coat of paint is to get rid of all the white. So you don't want to have to be trying to get rid of those later on. So you're just applying some paint, and I've got some yellow now. I quite like to let paint, just for this exercise, I'm just letting the paint blend actually on the paper. So you want to get rid of all that white. That's it. I'll just clean my brush off a little bit. And then my coat. I'm going to mix up a very pale colour, so I'm just going to show you the dry brushing technique that we're going to do in a little while. To show you, you can either dry brush with a lighter or a darker colour, depending on obviously the background, so it needs to be, so I'll make this paler. Get some more white to slap in there. So that's all covered, as you can see. Obviously that would need to be dried off again, and we do the same with the tissue paper. So I'll put that to one side, come in with the tissue. So I'm really trying to scrub a bit at it. So that's why it needs to be nice and dry. Otherwise, obviously it won't work. It will just, the tissue paper will rip. And if you've got the flour and paint surface underneath, if it's not completely dry, obviously the texture won't stay, or you just flatten it all if it's not dry and squash it. So quite important to make sure it's very thoroughly dry before you do this. Scrubbing away. I'll just finish painting this one, and then I'll get them both dry, and then I'll show you the dry brushing technique. Okay, so I've dried it all off now, and I'm just going to show you the dry brushing technique. Okay, so literally the brush is very dry. Okay, make sure thoroughly dry, and just putting a little bit of paint on it. Show you, I'm just going to take the excess paint off. Even take it off on a tissue, just to make sure you've only got a little bit of paint on there, and you're glancing. That's the only way I can really describe it. And what you're trying to do is capture the raised areas, and it should, you can hear that sort of scratchy sound. That's because it's nice and dry. See, I'm just dry brushing with white here. Hopefully, can you see that that captures just the raised areas, and it sort of brings it to life slightly. I'm just going to do the bottom of this a nice dark Prussian blue here. So I'm just going to see if I'm very lightly, just very lightly glance along. See if I can pick out the texture, the raised areas. And hopefully you can see that now the texture shows up a lot more. I'll do something similar on this one with the tissue, and then I'm going to just show you some examples of other sheets, obviously using various different colours. So I'm just going to get some white paint. I need a clean brush on. Sorry, it's called out a clean brush, that's it. I'm just going to very lightly glance, just Brings out all those lovely, that lovely creasy texture, which is just lovely. You can see that, bringing that out. Just also going to show you, some people struggle with doing this with a brush. If you do really struggle, the other thing you could try if you wanted to, if you've got any oil pastels, you could always, again it needs to be thoroughly dry, use an oil pastel and sort of glance the oil pastel across. Some people find that easier. Or the other thing, you could try putting a little bit of paint on your finger and just a bit lightly rubbing. That works as well. So hopefully you can see that lovely texture. I'm going to just do something similar on here. So I'm going to do a darker colour. Use a little bit of that Prussian again, and then I'm going to show you using an oil pastel on this one as well. So I'm just going to glance across just lightly, picking out that lovely texture. Hopefully you can see that. And I'm also now going to try using an oil pastel to show you. I'm going to use a contrasting colour. I've got a nice purple here. See, this is what I would be using this in the sea, but I'm just to show you. Lovely. Nice little bit of text colour there. You can see that actually really brings the texture out. I hope you can see that. Now I'm just going to show you some sheets that I've created earlier. There you go. Some various sheets here. Using the techniques I've just shown you. So here obviously flower applied in different ways. Here's some tissue down here. Obviously dry brushed with contrasting colours. There's another sheet here. This time the flower has been sort of applied in almost in slabs there. More swirly. But it's just, and that one's just a sheet, oops, upside down, where I've actually tried different things on one sheet and actually written down what I've used to make the different marks using the flower and the paint. This is tissue paper, and this one is dry brushed or rubbed with oil pastel, and this one here is dry brushed with paint. Okay, and again just one more sheet. So it's quite good to have a little bit of practice with this, so that when you come to do your painting, you can use it in an appropriate way. Okay, we'll have a go, and then we're going to get on to doing the painting. Okay, so now we're coming to do our main developed painting. So I'm just going to show you a few that I've done earlier. This one obviously is a much more of a traditional sort of seascape. Use lots and lots of texture on the rocky areas using tissue paper and the flower mixed up to get really craggy sort of texture on the rocks. Also use the flower and the paint mixed together and sort of dragged it so that I've got the sort of the movement of the water in the direction I want it to go. I haven't put any texture in the sky at all on this one. This one's just using sort of watercolour paints just to create a sort of nice flowy sky. This one, again, quite more of a traditional one, a bit more choppy sea this time. I've used scrunched tissue paper on the sea here. Again, no texture in the sky, just sort of watercolour, you know, washes on that. Now, obviously I've got a couple of pictures here of bigger paintings that I've done where I've actually used a bit more texture on here. So this one here, I've actually got lots of texture on the rocks, sort of very much more zooming into a section of the sort of splashy, crashing waves on the rocks here. Again, this one zooming into a section, and this one a bit more stormy. So I've actually used quite a lot of texture in the sky and the sea. So obviously you've got the option of what sort of mood or feel you want to create. Okay, so that's the first stage, sort of thinking about how you want to proceed with this, and then we'll go on to actually making our textured background. Okay, so this is my photo I'm using as reference, just loosely basing my painting on this. I'm zooming into a section. I'm not having the lighthouse or any detail at all, just concentrating on these sort of big crashy waves, but I really like the sort of diagonal shapes sort of following through here, which is what I'm sort of going to look at. Okay, so I created a textured background. I photocopied it because I painted it white before I start, and you won't be able to see the detail. So I've used just quite a small scale, and I'm going to have some of the collage actually coming off the edges to break it up a little bit on mine. I've used crunched up tissue paper, flour mixed with paint and some scrunched up brown paper here, because that's a slightly firmer, different sort of creases to create there. And I painted it all white, so as you can see, you can't really tell what I've done once you painted it. I quite like to paint it white before I start, but that's just, and then I can just slap anything on the top without worrying too much, but that's entirely up to you. You don't have to put the white on first. Okay, so that's the first stage. I'm just using a bit of card. Actually, this is just a bit of old food packaging. I tend to recycle sort of cereal type thickness card, which I find works really quite well for this sort of thing, or a very nice thick cartridge paper will do just fine. But it's not flimsy paper, otherwise you'll end up, it'll all sort of start scrunching up and disintegrating a bit once we start painting it. Okay, so that's the first stage. Create your texture where you want it, letting it flow to get the sort of the texture of the sea, and decide if you want to have texture in your sky, or if you're zooming into a section like I am and just having the crashy waves. Get it all stuck down. You need to dry it, and then, like I have, if you want to, paint it white, and then you're ready to start actually putting your colour on. See, mine's dry now, and what we're going to do, I'm going to start adding some colour. Okay, now when it's like this, I know it's really difficult to see, but I've got this texture coming down here to sort of represent the sea sort of coming down at an angle, and that's going to be a little bit of sea spray and a little bit of sky up here. So I'm going to start off with a very light colour, and I'm going to be scrumbling this loosely on. Okay, and letting it build up. I'm using some cyan blue and just some white at the moment. Cyan blue is a little bit like phthalo blue, slightly turquoisey. So I'm going to bring that down. Just start applying that and building it up. And in a minute I'm going to start adding some other colours sort of into this a little bit. I'm going to just sort of start introducing some other colours into this a little bit. Just making sure it's sort of following the direction I want it to go, to suggest the wave sort of coming in this direction. And I like to do this while the acrylic's nice and thick and creamy, and you can just, I start to sort of scrumble it on really, and let one colour blend it on the paper into another a little bit. So I'm going to build that up just using this first layer, and then I'm going to show you start adding in some sort of tonal contrast. Okay, so that's the sort of first coat put on. That's just using the phthalo blue and white and blending it on the paper. Now what I'm going to do, I've got some phthalo blue and a tiny touch of lemon yellow mixed together with a little bit of white, and I'm just trying to create a slightly more greeny turquoisey shade. I'm going to just add in some little touches of turquoise, sort of where the wet waves are sort of going to go coming down and breaking up a little bit, which will sort of add a bit of interest. So again, I'm just going to putting these on, and I quite used to use my fingers actually, and I'm just going to scrumble that around a little bit, just so I'm going to get some lighter areas coming in here. Breaking it up a little bit here, just a couple of areas. And I'm going to go in and put a little bit more the phthalo blue as well. So I'm just going to come in and just start adding, so adding the sort of mid-tones really and the lights at the moment, and then I'm going to come in and I'm actually going to dry this off, and I'm going to go in and you can either use some Anna Linky's watercolours or inks. And what I like to do is actually this stage with the texture, I quite like to let those run and flow in between the texture, and they sort of give you some nice interesting things happening. I'm just sort of scrumbling my brush around, as you can see, and letting it pick up some of the texture here. Right, okay, I think that's enough, and I'm going to dry that off, and then I'm going to get in with some anilinki. Okay, so all nice and dry now. The great thing about acrylics is that once it's dry, it's not re-wettable, so anything you put on the top isn't going to disturb the colours underneath. They're not going to physically mix together. So I'm now going to, that seems a bit of a contradiction, but just with clean water, just wet a couple of areas because I want the paint. I'm now going to use Anilinkis, or you could say use your drawing inks would be great as well, or acrylic inks. And I'm going to just apply some colour and let it run a little bit. So I'm going in with some turquoise first of all, then deciding where I want the lighter areas to be. So I'm going to go in with some of this lovely turquoise, and I'm going to hold it up and let it just run around and hopefully trickle a little bit into the little nooks and crannies of this. There we are. Let it run about a bit. Let it run and trickle. Hopefully you can see that running. Which is something I just love doing. Sorry, just realised I was out of shot, sorry. Right, hopefully you can see that running and trickling a little bit. This will dry, Anilinki, because it's a dye base, but it's a watercolour, so it sort of tends to dry much lighter. It sort of sinks in, so sometimes you have to do this several times. If you're using inks, you won't. It will just sort of stay where it is. And ink is permanent. That's the only thing, is if you use ink and you don't like it, you can't take it off. But with this, you can actually sort of re-wet it and wipe it off a bit if you think, oh God, I don't like it. Just let that trickle a bit so it's a bit more interesting. I'm also going to make that a bit more turquoise. I'm going to get some yellow. I'm just using these obviously Anilinkis that you've seen me use before. I'm going to come in and actually daub some yellow into these areas, which will make them brighter, greener, a bit more of a contrast really. Just putting a bit of water on, letting it run. Catch the drips. There's getting a bit more colour and interest going in there. That's nice. I can put a little tiny touch more in, just a little bit more blue. Let them run and trickle. So I'm just going to play with this for a few more minutes and dry it off with a hairdryer. Okay, so I've dried that off. I hope you can see that's given it some nice sort of more greeny areas, which are quite nice. I'm also now going to just doing the same technique using Anilinki. I'm going to add a little bit of a very dark blue, but then I'm going to finish this off with obviously ordinary paint. So I'm just going to come in, just daub in a few little areas with the darker colour, and then I'm going to wet it and let it run. Just daubing that on just in a few places where you'd have some of the darker colour coming through. I'm just looking at the photograph as sort of inspiration for where I might get darks and lights. There we are. So what I'm now going to do, I'm going to slap some water on this, just wet this. So I've got some clean water, just daubing it, the water on, so it will run about a bit and be a bit more natural looking. Right, now I'm going to let it run. Ooh, I need a tissue in case it drips everywhere. There we are. I'm going to let that trickle and run around. Just wetting so it will run, because it obviously only will run where the paper is wet. Another thing you can do, if you like, is you can actually very lightly, give it a spray. It's just a bit of spray. Sprayed some water on it. There we are. That's better. It allows it to run and trickle a bit more naturally. There we are. Sorry. Flow. There we are. Yeah, let's give it some darker colours in there. So what I might do is just dab a little bit of that off there. If you don't like it, you can take it away. Yeah, I think it's giving it a bit more interest, a bit more movement going on. I think I just want to, this area here, I'm going to lighten it up again. Just going to go in with a little of the yellow. Just, that's it. Then again, let it run. Run and trickle. Just trying to let it get a bit of a sense of movement in there. Just a bit more colour here, I think. Need just a tiny bit. So I'm letting that run and trickle. There we are. I'm just going to let that run a little bit more and then I'm drying this off. Okay, so I've dried all the analinky off. And what I'm going to do now is I'm going to come in and add some of the darker tones to the here. So the sea obviously is very, very choppy. So I'm just going to, looking at my photo, I'm just going to come in and this is Prussian blue. Just going to come in and add some touches of a darker, a bit of a darker colour. And again, I might rub those slightly, blend a little bit in, rather than being too definite. Just so I've got a few areas to suggest more movement in the water. Just a little bit here as well, I think. That's it, so that sort of suggests a bit more movement going on there. That's it, I think. Okay, again, another bit of drying, and then we're ready. Once you're happy with all your colour, we're ready for the dry brushing to reveal that lovely texture again. Right, so that's now thoroughly dry, and I'm going to finish it off by dry brushing with a little bit of white paint to hopefully reveal that lovely texture. Get a bit of tissue ready. Nice dry brush, and start glancing, lightly glancing over the texture. So sometimes I start off very gently and actually just let it and gradually build up and add more and more. I'll just do a little bit to show you, and then I'll carry on and show you the final painting. I'm just going to a bit more on there. Just do a little bit to show you and you get the idea. It'll take a little while for me to work my way around. Hopefully you can see that little section that I've just dry brushed starting to reveal that lovely texture. So I'm just going to carry on because I want to do it slowly so I don't mess it up, and then I'll come back and show you. Okay, so I've spent quite a long time just dry brushing all this now. Hopefully you can see that's really revealed the texture, giving it much more sense of movement, like the waves are crashing. The only other thing I'm going to do to this, I think, is just going to add, I've diluted this acrylic a bit. I'm hoping I can splatter it a little bit. So what I'm going to try and do is a little bit on my palette knife, see if I can do a few little splatters just at sort of up here, just sort of as the sort of crushy waves are coming and spilling over. So I'm just going to do a few little splattery bits coming down. A few here. Yeah, I think that's enough. That's just giving it a bit more of a sense of whoosh. Now, I'll do it on here. Oh, I'd leave it on there because you can see it better, but hopefully you can see that that is actually now that I've actually dry brushed, all that lovely texture is revealed, and it's given it much more sense of movement. So I hope you have a go. It's lots of fun. I really enjoy doing this technique. It's quite random. Let it do its thing. Let the paint run around and flow into those lovely sort of textures actually, which actually helps give it sense of movement. Often lovely things happen that you hadn't expected, which I think is great. The slideshow is going to be coming up of other students who have done this with me in a class before. And if you do Facebook, please would you put any of your work that you do on our Facebook page. We'd love to see what you've been doing. And next time we're going to be looking at using these lovely techniques, but using doing a landscape scene. Okay, thank you ever so much. Bye.